you said you could achieve low overhead, you can achieve automation, right? Aren't those two kind of important principles when it comes to the valuation of a company or the desire of somebody to acquire a company?
It's not an option anymore. It's just not an option. Every company, if you're not investing in technology to not only enhance your service offering, but to reduce your SG&A costs, your overhead, your admin burden to produce this work, you are putting yourself in a precarious place.
All right, welcome everybody to the Albi Afterhours Restoration Podcast. Decided to do things a little bit differently than Albi Afterhours usually. And in this podcast, my goal is to bring people that kind of have the same ethos of innovation within the restoration space. And today, we are honored to have Kevin Dooley, longtime restorer and now founder of Kahi, an innovative new technology within the space. So I'd like to welcome you, Kevin. Thanks for partaking and biting the bullet. Welcome.
Hey, pal. Thanks.
So why don't you introduce yourself and kind of tell us, how long you've been in the industry, background on you, your biggest challenges within the industry and your, highest highs within the industry. Yeah. Why don't we say that?
Oh boy, where do we begin? Yeah, so I'm a second generation restorer. So I've been in the industry full time since 2002, I think. So 20 years full time at it, but really been doing it since I was a kid. Summers, March breaks, things like that. I was out on the flood truck and carpet cleaning and doing all that stuff through high school and what have you. Excuse me, sorry. I'm going to cough every once in a while. I apologize to all your listeners. But yeah, so I've been in the industry for, the better part of my entire life, really. When my dad sold his businesses, he went over to Dry Ease, helped build what's now, well, at the time was known as Dry Zone, which eventually became the ASD program. Did that for a few years, went on to work at another major chain, and then ultimately went independent teaching early 2000s. And at that time I was going through college and helping him out part-time through the school and just meeting contractors throughout Canada and the US. And I realized back then that there was very little support for contractors in the realms of like subcontract mitigation and drying. There was really one big company back then known as Munters, which everybody knows, but there was a couple little independents back then too, but it wasn't like what we know today, is where there's rental and drying companies are a dime a dozen. So back then, understanding there was a need to support contractors and already training them through many IRCC programs, I went on to start a company supporting contractors doing drying and mitigation and abatement services, and started out in my mom's garage, literally a couple pieces of equipment back in like 03-04, and then did a couple storms those seasons there, and done hurricanes in Florida, and then Katrina was like the breakout year for us in 05 and took a gamble and went down there, did a bunch of drying jobs, and kind of just over the years took it from mom's garage to like 110-ish odd employees, and kind of doing drying and support services all over Canada and the States. And that partnership went awry about 6-7 years ago, and co-founded a new company, which is where I'm at now, Restoration Co. Similar type business model and support services for contractors. And over the years, by virtue of my business model, we're a wholesaler of services, and so I needed to figure out, how to deliver a high value service as contractors would expect to deliver it to their customers, but do it for a fraction of the price. So because of the nature of the business model, it forced me into looking into systems and thinking about systems in different ways to run my business, to automate tasks that traditionally would just be done by people. So naturally I gravitated towards technology and just kind of getting really deep into different components and aspects of technology and attending seminars and all that good stuff. And I jumped in about 7, 8 years ago into the foray of building a job management system for restoration companies. Kind of similar to what you're doing at Albi. So very
Hmm.
commendable for you because man, that's a process and a huge undertaking. Um, and we built it for ourselves and looking to bring it to the market. And as I mentioned, things didn't go quite as planned there. But when we started this new company, we quickly built up our fleet of inventory and equipment rental, and of course, being that tech-minded kind of guy, I look to think of, one, we need to solve a problem for ourselves with this equipment that we're putting all over the country. And then two, like, just my thirst and desire to kind of be like a tech innovator, how we can
Hmm.
productize something and create an MVP, minimum viable product, to come out in the space. And so we honed in on asset tracking because we wanted to want to track our stuff, and we knew that a lot of the contractors, almost all the contractors that I've dealt with across the country, either had an inadequate system vis-a-vis like barcode, QR code, or frankly pen and paper, or God forbid nothing.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that kind of birthed Kahi, and I looked at some solutions that were in the marketplace, and frankly, they were either just from a technological point of view not very good, or some stuff that was decent and respectable, but just extremely expensive, and so it didn't really make sense. So that kind of just pushed us into building our own, and that whole process started about roughly 3 years ago, and Kahi and Ernest, we kind of came out into the market about a year ago this time, so early
Hmm.
2021. And fast forward to today, we've installed quite a few across locations right across Canada and the U.S. And things are going quite well. So sorry, long story, but that's
No,
that's that's the Cole's notes on my career, I guess, to date so far.
that's what we're looking for. So you mentioned automation, right? And you being a very big fan of automation, and you were forced to, automate certain tasks within your business. Would you
Yeah,
say, one, that's pretty rare to find within the restoration industry, right? Like you don't
yeah,
typically
absolutely.
find automated restoration businesses, right?
Yeah, like from like what I view as automation, I'd say it's extremely rare. It's becoming a little
Okay.
bit better now over the last couple of few years. Like there's new products coming out, Albi being one of them, and then some others tools that which is cool with them is their open integration. So like you guys are able with
Hmm.
Albi to integrate into and kind of create more like ERP type systems, but cloud-based
Hmm.
infrastructure with modern design. So that's cool. But yeah, for up until as of late, there really hasn't been anything or and companies that I know of in our space that are legitimately automating. Like we're within my operation, we're running 3 locations, in the zone of high 60, low 70 technicians between the 3 locations, and we have one full-time bookkeeper and a part-time CFO that manages all the payroll, all our bookkeeping for 6 different organizations. So it's I think a little bit out of the norm in terms of SG&A costs and back end infrastructure costs to run an organization that
Hmm.
size, and that's frankly just because we've automated our timekeeping, consumable tracking, equipment tracking, and billing infrastructure. So
So why doesn't the typical restorer, you've been in the industry longer than I have,
mm.
why won't the typical restorer embrace, automated technology? Was it not available until now? I mean, I can't say we're the first ones to bring it. Is it
Yeah.
too hard to implement? Do people not see the value in this? What would you say?
there there's a handful of different reasons for lack of choice of words. I think if we look at the restoration industry on a macro level right now, there's kind of a changing of the guard, so to speak. So, in a sense of, first generation contractors who got into the industry, 20, 30, 40 years ago are now, retiring, exiting, whatever. M&A activity, as we all know, is huge. And that's, case in point for, kind of what I'm hinting at right now. And I think
Hmm.
that generation up until the last, handful of years were, they old school guys, they did things with the handshake, they did things pen and paper, and they, you know, not to speak poorly of anybody, but it's just, I think to my dad and, guys of that age, vintage, that just weren't as technologically inclined, and that's just the reality. And then you look at other things about other jobs management systems that have been in our space for the last, decade to 15 odd years. And back then when they were bringing stuff out, they built these software platforms mostly with how I would say they built them for the admin team, the management team first, and then outward. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so versus how I view technology should be built, especially for our industry where we're primarily a field service business, restoration contractors, that is. And in my view, the technology should be built for the field service person to then drive downstream processes to the back end. So, and we can talk about this if you like, but high level, like today's restoration contractor needs to be designing their business to be SG&A light, meaning low overhead, less back end office admin support, reducing your costs. And when you're capturing data, it should be as much as possible one and done. So when you're talking about time record keeping, it should flow from the mobile device in the field or whatever is capturing that time to an approval and then done. It's in payroll, it's in job costing, it's in all these different elements of these systems to like do it versus retyping the same data over and over and over. And it's just crazy. So anyway, I digress a little bit, but I think those are at least a few of the reasons. There are many more as well, but a couple of reasons why I think technology. And then actually, what I wanted to hit on too is that so these legacy softwares that have been in the business for some time. Frankly, and this is no slight towards them, they were painful to get on early days. They were built a certain way, and it came with a lot of pain to to implement and configure and then manage and all that. And I think many people, after living that experience, once they've got their systems to a spot that are, somewhat quasi acceptable, might not be the best, and they may be lacking in some areas. They are lacking, from being honest. People just are a little reluctant to change, but I think that's changing now with the change of the guard. So we're seeing the children of these second generation restorers now taking the lead, and obviously they've been built in the iPhone era, or built growing up, I should say, in the iPhone era. So, technology is like second nature, right? So the risk adversity is kind of gone. Change is now a regular thing. It's an everyday thing. So moving to new systems that offer a better solution, I think, is now becoming more palatable. And I think, but case in point, like what you guys are doing in Albi is awesome, and I think it's demonstrating now on people looking to explore and be willing to try new things and see how they can benefit their companies. So anyway, yeah.
How easy would you say, like taking a look at new technology? Obviously, Matterport's a newer technology within the restoration space. We can give Kahi as an example, and Circle sure is in that realm too.
Yeah.
How easy would you compare these to implement versus, I don't know, let's take a Dinosaur Chronicle or Client Runner? Would you say newer technology is actually easier to implement than the older technology was back then?
Absolutely. Like, most, any system that's going to charge you like this massive onboarding fee and have like a big configuration training program, like I tend to question a bit of that. Like modern tech should be by and large fairly easy to onboard onto, self-managed. There's obviously some challenges with CRM and things like that, and you just need to nudge people along as a tech vendor supporting these contractors and what have you, at least in our space. But yeah, absolutely. Like Matterport is brilliant what they're doing. DocuSketch is quite cool. Encircle by and large is pretty easy. Kahi is like plug and play. It's beyond easy. And if you're, as a tech vendor, if you're not designing your processes and systems in such a way that people can onboard by for the most part on their own or with somewhat little support, then I think you're doing it wrong.
Depending on the space, right? I mean,
Sure.
we onboarded onto HubSpot and we still needed a full, onboard. I think with the job management system, just because
Yeah.
there are so many things, it's a little bit harder. But when you're looking at vertical software, yes, the easier it is,
Well,
the better it is. So,
absolutely. There's definitely truth to that statement. And CRM is always a tough slug as a tech vendor to kind of get people to change their ways, especially if they haven't been on a CRM. It's just entering their data, getting them used to it, making sure Salesforce using it. We could talk all about that, of course. And then on the job management side, yeah, like making sure they have the proper chart of accounts set up and their costing structure set up so that things flow properly when you're looking more like an ERP type install. Absolutely. So yeah, for sure. For sure.
got it. Awesome. What's your biggest word of advice to somebody out there that's sitting and kind of reluctant on adopting new technology? Maybe it's the cost. Maybe it's, hey, it's going to be a stick in the eye to implement it. How do they know if they should even switch to something more modern?
Boy, yeah, I see that often. Scarcity seems to be a little bit of an inherent mindset I've seen within the restoration space to a certain degree. And it's not to be negative or, be a swipe at anyone. It just seems to be a natural thing for whatever reason. Cost is important, of course. It's got to fit within your means and your budget and all that stuff. There's no doubt about it. But, you know, I think people need to, think about things a little bit differently in terms of like, okay, there's a cost for this solution, but, you know, is it going to reduce my SG&As by a couple few points? Is it going to enable us to deliver the product, which the product is not only what the guys are doing out in the field, but the product is the documentation and everything else that accompanies it. And can you deliver that documentation at a much more rapid clip, uh, um, accurate, of course, and all that good stuff to turn around your invoice in a timely fashion and have the data metrics there. So like, an admin these days, man, you know, it depends on the market, obviously, but man, I've seen admins, getting up into the 80, 90, 100K mark for solid ones. So like, it doesn't take much when you can remove an admin role by leveraging tech to say, hey,
Yep.
if I'm spending 10 grand, even 5 grand a month on different softwares to like automate a bunch of different elements of the business, sure, it's a big nut, but
Yep.
if you can be more agile and deliver a better product, then it's worth it, you know?
Yeah, and I'd chime in here too. I think it boosts company morale overall
Absolutely.
because a lot of times tech ends up outsourcing or replacing these tedious tasks that people don't typically want to do, right? Like the 24-hour follow-up call, or paper mailing invoices to everybody, or
Mhm.
whatnot. So now, okay, we do have higher paid, more qualified admins, right? And we have less of them, but they're also not sitting there miserable because they have 200 pieces of paper to put in a folder and
Exactly.
send out, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, man. And making sure that it's done consistently, time and time again, repeatable process. And like when people were in office, I think in the States is not so much of an issue in terms of people being in office these days, I think. But up north, like people are still by and large working from home. And so because people will be going back to the office, when they go back to the office and you have the whole, you know, people are probably going to be so excited to see other people again. They're going to be chatting and socializing more than actually doing
yep,
activities. So these are all costs, right?
yep.
So, you
You
know,
bring up an interesting point, especially with, coronavirus and what coronavirus taught us, right? Especially in the restoration space. We
yeah,
thought, hey, we were first responders, we're never going to stay home and so on and so forth. But a lot of our offices ended up working from home. And
yeah,
now a lot of challenges come up, like, a simple one, my office phone system. Well, I got the office phones in the office, and now I've got people working from home. How do I shift them, right? So that's where VoIP came into play. And if you did have a voice over IP system, right, you had success with that. Now, the other thing is with the labor shortage, you have to cast a wider net, right? Like if we look at restoration accounts receivable specialists or restoration estimators, right? if you look within a market like Chicago, there's probably 50 qualified candidates. If you look at the market like the entire US, well, now you've got 5,000, right? And if
Yeah.
you're ever able to leverage Chicago Pay to an Idaho estimator, and you're able to actually hire that estimator remotely, and you have the tech in place to be able to, support that remote estimator, well,
Yeah.
now you're leveraging technology and you're, alleviating the pains that the labor shortage has caused. So,
Boom. Absolutely.
another thing to ask you, I think you mentioned M&A in the past, right? What's your take on the value that technology brings restoration companies, especially like you're talking about, you said you could achieve low overhead, you can achieve automation, right? Aren't those two kind of important principles when it comes to the valuation of a company or the desire of somebody to acquire a company?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not an option anymore. It's just not an option. Um, you, every company, if you're not investing in technology to um, not only enhance your service offering, but to reduce your SG&A costs, your overhead, your admin burden to produce this work, you are in putting yourself in a precarious place. I can't, this is a huge, huge point for anybody listening to this to understand. The industry is changing at a rapid clip. We all know that, and we haven't seen nothing yet. When we talk about M&A, like the companies that are doing it right, if they do it right, and I emphasize if, but there will be some that are doing it right. When they can centralize their back end function to a location, or at least reduced overhead locations, and having a more centralized system, leveraging technology to bring inputs from all these different geographies into a hub. By virtue of that, they're going to outcompete single locations, be it franchise or independent. So if these franchisees and independents don't start following suit and trying to find systems and tools to do the same, they're going to have a hard time competing, because the bigger guys, the bigger fish, the whales are going to be able to do it cheaper, the bottom line. So
Yep.
they'll be able to offer the same product for a much lesser margin, but they'll still be as profitable, if not more, because they got
And probably
the
higher quality too, right?
perhaps, yeah,
Hmm,
you know,
I see.
at least from a back end perspective, and like how the technology is supposed to support these organizations, like they have to. If you're not actively, you know, looking at your systems, like every quarter, how can we dial this thing in? How can we improve our systems? How can we automate stuff? If you're not actively doing that and consciously thinking about that, every quarter, every year, you're missing a big opportunity. You're putting your company at big risk.
I see.
Yeah.
Awesome. I don't know if you want to talk about data a little bit, and the importance of, we're using all this different technology. Obviously, with every amazing, innovative technology that comes out comes, the responsibility of this technology, right? I don't know if you saw in the news with the air tags that now there's no more slipping stuff in people's drinks. Now it's putting an air tag in people's purses or personal belongings and then tracking them that way, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, the air tags were designed similarly to Kahi's Bluetooth beacons for one purpose,
Yeah.
but were used otherwise. So as restorers, right, how can we educate ourselves on, one, how important is our data, right? I think that's number one. And two, how can we educate ourselves on what's happening with our data and if our data is at risk? And what are some of the repercussions that can happen from data?
Oh, well, there's the obvious ones from a repercussions point of view. If you don't have the security controls in place and permissions in place, rogue employees or outside individuals. I don't know if that's such a big thing, but mind you, I do know I have some personal relationships with hackers that have done some ransomware activities. So that's pretty wild. So there's definitely some concerns from a security point of view that owners need to be mindful of and proactive on, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm kind of, in terms of data, like in terms of using the data, I think it's definitely important. I don't.
Nope, I think I lost you.
Oh, Did you lose me? Am I there?
Yeah, you're back now.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Not sure
No,
what
no problem.
internet there. Um, in terms of data, I don't. It's aggregating the data still seems to be somewhat of a bit of a difficult task by and large for, we'll say, like the average restorer, anyways. There's some interesting business intelligent tools available that has some robust APIs that you can connect systems to extract that data. Um, I think, you know, as a restorer, you don't necessarily need to get to that point yet until you've kind of cleaned up some of these other lower level items, so to speak. So, have you automated your payroll? Have you automated job costing? Have you like automated your expense reporting and things like that? Like, if you haven't done those things, which are low hanging fruit in my mind, then don't really worry about too much about your data aside from making sure you're job costing properly. But once you've kind
Okay.
of dialed that stuff in, then yeah, the next level of your data I think is pretty important to kind of start, further dialing things in and looking at certain KPIs. And I know that's more in your world. I'd be interested to hear what you got to say about that. But um, by and large, when we're talking restorers, I'm not quite sure. Generally speaking, many are quite there yet from that level of data, but I think it's pretty cool. And as we
Yeah.
move down the pipe, I think. Sorry, I'll finish on this and I'll let you talk. Um,
No, go ahead.
when we look about like assets and start thinking about Kahi and how assets behave in the field, I think there's some really interesting things around the asset world, um, both from a human capital point of view and then actual the physical assets and how they're behaving on job sites, how they're being used, and are they performing as they should, and delivering transparency to that process to all stakeholders to help validate not only the production but help hopefully make it easier to facilitate getting paid and that kind of stuff. So from that element, there's some super interesting stuff that I think are going to start to become available over the next, you know, 12 to 24 months, I would suspect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I think of data is in one way, shape, or the other, we as individuals or we as companies are the product of something, right?
Mm.
And obviously, Facebook's a prime example of it. We're the product of Facebook. Facebook takes us and sells us back to advertisers.
Yeah.
But now, we take us as restorers within a restoration market, and we look at Matterport, right? We're the product of Matterport. They're trying to 3D image the entire world to, gain more information on, basically the entire world. They're trying to map it, and there's all kinds of things that are, going on with Matterport. Put it on a level like, Kahi or job management systems. Let's just say asset tracking solutions and job management systems. So we
Yeah.
don't name anybody, right? I think there's two categories. There's going to be a category of we're utilizing data such as asset behavior and so on and so forth to further innovate and to further enhance the industry,
Yeah.
right? So that's one. And
Yeah.
then I think there's another category of we're utilizing data to make a profit off of,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think for restorers, it's important to understand those two, right?
Yeah.
Let's say, a company like Albi comes out with an AI tomorrow, and that AI is better for the industry because it helps restorers identify, where they're bleeding money. Or let's say, Kahi comes out tomorrow with some sort of algorithm, and again, I don't know
Yeah.
what you're cooking, right? But let's just say, with some sort of algorithm that reduces drive time or reduces drying time
Yep.
per se,
Yep.
right? Totally great. We're a product and we're part of this innovation, and we're giving our data to companies like those who are going to innovate.
Yep.
Now, the retrospect that we have to be careful with as restorers is, are we giving our data to our opponents, right?
Yeah.
Is Kahi going to go sell our data off to the insurance carriers, and now
Yeah.
the insurance carriers have the data that dry time could be less, and now they're going to utilize that data to combat our invoices, right?
Yep.
So I think personally, and I'm very passionate on this topic, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
people don't even realize, like, oh my God, Facebook's free, but they don't realize they're the product.
Yep.
Same thing is happening within our industry, and we've got, two major players that were no innovation. They were just data plays that I think, restorers should be careful about and keep an eye out. So
Yeah, I
that's
agree.
my input.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. It's not something to take lightly, no doubt. Yeah.
but speaking of innovation, anything that you'd like to share of what's coming out new within Kahi, anything innovative that you guys are building on? Again, if you mind sharing, if you don't want to, that's fine.
Yeah, no, we're pretty forthright, so to speak, at least in our near term plans. We have a super beacon coming out pretty soon. Actually, we're testing it now.
Awesome.
Should be going into production early part of Q2. Effectively, super beacon is it has multi purposes. One is it's a large asset tracker, large asset tracker, so like a big iron type device. So it could be a desiccant generator, Bobcat, etc. Its own
Okay.
GPS SIM on board, so you can track those individual items. But then it also doubles down as a gateway. So when that super beacon is affixed into like a semi trailer or a cargo trailer, for example, that you're tracking, any of our small Bluetooth beacons with lower value assets inside said trailer are then tracked in live time vis-a-vis the super beacon. And then another use case is to temporarily provision the super beacon to a site. So then it connects the assets that are at the location online in real time, which will then follow suit with our next round of sensors, which will include environmental sensors. So equipment performance, what's going on in the chamber, and all these things will be accessible through our API. So we're not looking to be the moisture tracking solution, but we are looking to gather the data from these assets in the field and then through our API present them to systems like Albi, where then it can enhance the moisture mapping and job documentation within those systems. So really we're looking to be the conduit and for some of these field data points to capture and really just enhance other platforms' products. So when people are looking to evaluate systems, like I would say is probably one of our strongest points is our API. We built the system to be API first and to really support systems like Albi and to better their products. And
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if we were going to poke a hole in the whole system right now, right? Currently, the gateways are on the trucks, right? So the equipment leaves the truck, and we know the last known location was this project, right? But while the equipment's at that project, we don't really, at this moment, have a way to know what's going on with it. However, if the super beacon comes into play, if I'm understanding correctly, and we have a super beacon at the project, well, now we have further visibility on what's going on with our equipment throughout those 3 to 5 days where there's no truck around. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So then
That's awesome.
equipment will,
It's exciting.
so as it works today, the equipment goes offline once the vehicle drives away from the site. With the introduction of the super beacon, the equipment will remain online while it's on site. So if anything were to happen to it, like get turned off or get stolen or whatever, we'll be able to report on that instantaneously.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for innovating within the restoration space. For those of you who don't know, Kevin and I had similar ideas when it came to asset tracking. And when I realized what he was doing, I was just like completely gave up on the idea of the asset tracking solution. Hardware is something really hard to deal with,
Yeah.
and they do an awesome job at Kahi. So I'm really glad we bumped into each other at the right time a couple years ago.
Yeah,
So
man. Likewise. No, it's been a pleasure working with you too, and I'm super excited with some of the stuff that we're going to be doing with you guys at Albi. It's super cool to see what you guys have developed over the last year and a bit, watching from an outsider looking in, and also with working with your team. It's quite impressive. You guys are moving and shaking, and I love the innovation that you guys are doing over there, and I think you're doing a lot of good. So keep it up, man.
thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It's a big project you guys got going on. So
Yeah, I mean, had I done things again, I'd probably start with a supplemental solution like one vertical as opposed to trying to tackle the entire thing. But we're ambitious. We definitely want to displace the current market and challenge the status quo, and that's what I want to do this entire podcast about, is find more people that are looking at, hey, just like you, barcodes, pen and paper, the heck with that. There's there's Bluetooth technology out here, and it's not like you invented Bluetooth technology. Not trying to knock you down, but it existed. It just didn't exist in the restoration space. So you're like, okay, let's take this and let's implement it. So that's awesome. Where can people find you if they have more questions about Kahi or want to chat restoration with you?
So simply our website is kahi.io, which is kahi.io. LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm pretty active in the industry groups, and you can, if you go to our website, there's the means to contact us and set up a demo and all that good stuff, or you can just reach out to Albi and they'll introduce you as well.
100%. Yeah, we I think every single call when we go over equipment tracking, we mention Kahi. So we love you guys. So, but yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast. This was the first one that we've done with somebody, so I'm excited, and hopefully we'll have you back on in 3 to 6 months once the super beacons are out to tell us all about those.
Beauty. Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep in touch, Kevin.